Alright guys, what's up? So welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about how to get your car dyno ready and everything you got to go over to make sure your car will, you're best prepared for the dyno and you got minimal things going wrong, because obviously that'll be an inconvenience for you and your tuner. And who likes wasting a day, I mean, everyone likes to get to the dyno and everything goes smooth and make as much power as reliably as possible. So we're going to go over all that today. Alright guys, so stay tuned and enjoy this video. So one of the first things you should be looking into and you should be worrying about is, do you have a tuning solution? There's a whole bunch of options. It all depends on your car. For me, I'm using Honda K-Pro. Some cars like DSMs have a black box that's basically the stock ECU that's completely flashable and tunable. And then you can get into more like standalone systems where like the AEM and Haltech offer systems. But make sure you look into how you can actually get your car tuned in terms of tuning solution. That's probably going to be one of the first things you need to worry about. You shouldn't be thinking about dyno tuning your car or getting a tune if you have no idea how your car is going to be tuned. So if you're not sure, contact your tuner. Make sure you got all that situated and make sure you actually have a solution of how to get your car tuned. So the next thing you should be worrying about is your engine mechanically sound. So first things first, always do an oil change. You should not be going on a dyno with old oil filter. Get that changed out. It's pretty cheap. Make sure you're running the correct weight. If you're not sure, just do a quick Google search and look into like what's the best weight oil and oil filter for your setup for what you're trying to do. Depending if you're all motor, turbo, supercharger, people might recommend different weight oils depending on if your engine is built or not built. And like your piston wall clearances, some engines might be looser, some might be tighter. So, it all really depends. There's a whole bunch of variables. So make sure you guys look into the oil you're running. All right, guys. So the next thing you'll be looking at is your compression. All right, guys. We don't want to get on the dyno and then we find out the car's not making power, and it's like, why? Well, save yourself the headache. Do a compression test. It doesn't cost much to do, and if you don't want to take it to a shop to do it, you can buy a compression tester and they're pretty cheap. So just do a compression test and make sure those numbers come out even across the board. That's the biggest thing you're looking at. You're not really looking at the peak number too much, but the most important thing is that all cylinders have all similar compression within 10 psi from each other. Alright guys? Next step is you want to look into your valve lash. Make sure the valve lash, so that's basically the tip of the cam roller and the valve tip, that clearance, make sure it's proper for your setup. If you have a high performance camshaft, make sure you use the recommended settings from that company. And if you're using a stock camshaft, usually underneath the hood, you'll have the settings right under there, and just get that done. Those are also, like I said, cheap things to do, cheap tools, cheap, shops usually do those things for cheap as well. So make sure you get a valve lash done, guys, okay? Alright guys, another thing to look into is, are all your sensors plugged in, all of them functioning? Things like the TPS sensor, that's the throttle position sensor, or the MAP sensor, okay? Mass air pressure. So there's a lot of sensors in this car or any car, that you should make sure that are all functioning properly. Make sure they're all plugged in. MAP sensor, TPS sensors, crank sensors, cam position sensors are all things you need to really, really worry about. You won't have a properly functioning engine without those sensors. Make sure the sensors are pinned correctly if you're running a whole new harness. So yeah, double check that your sensors are getting signals. You should be able to do that within your tuning solution. For K-Pro, I use the K Manager, so I will check in the settings and make sure that I'm getting a reading from all my sensors in the car. Alright guys, after you have all your sensors running, everything is functioning correctly, the next step is, do you have any immediate check engine lights? Like if you're cranking the car when you're doing compression tests and right away it's throwing a code for a crank sensor or timing sensor or something, anything timing related, or if you're getting low voltage, those are things to all look like. Make sure you just, right away, you're always keep an eye on that check engine light, especially if the car hasn't fully started. Sometimes it'll start throwing codes right away. or when you do your first start, you check for engine codes and make sure there's nothing too concerning. Some setups will naturally throw codes if it's a very high-end build. Sometimes things might be slightly out of phase, and certain sensors might have to be disabled depending on, like, if you have a fuel cell, you might have a whole bunch of codes coming up for that, or if you don't have a catalytic converter, you'll get codes for that. So just, make sure there's not any worrisome codes. There's some codes that you might expect until it gets on a dyno and gets all sorted out. Alright guys, another important thing to look into when you're getting ready for the dyno tune or dyno session before you get your car out there, and like I said, we don't want to waste our time, waste our tuner's time. Check the health of your battery, check your grounds. When you're on a dyno, there's a lot of, the car turns on and off a lot, and if your battery is not up to the task, then they're going to have to be pulling out the good old, jumper box, or in the end of the day, even your battery might just not be good and might not have enough volts to even have the car properly tuned. I mean, a lot of these sensors and the ignition system relies on proper voltage. Without those proper voltages, you're never going to get the car tuned properly. So just make sure your battery's sound, just double check your grounds, make sure everything is good, your charging system is up to task, like your alternator, and you should be all set on that department. Alright guys, another thing you can look into is your fuel system. Make sure your fuel system has fuel pressure. When you turn on the car switch and the fuel pump turns on, make sure it's priming properly. Make sure if you have an aftermarket fuel system, make sure the fuel pressure regulator is regulated correctly and you have it set to the correct fuel pressure that your car requires. And most importantly, check over all the fuel lines, even if it's OEM or aftermarket. Make sure you have no fuel leaks. It's very dangerous. It's very hazardous. It causes fires. Make sure all your lines are perfectly in working order without no damage, basically. So just double check the lines. We don't want any lines blowing out on the dyno. The fuel pressure system is a high pressure system. So just go over the lines. Make sure you don't have any leaks. Make sure you have that fuel pressure set up to the correct fuel pressure for your setup. Alright guys, moving on to the coolant system. This was a super easy one. Make sure all your hoses are up to task. None of them are old and brittle. Replace the ones that need replacing. Make sure you have all the air pockets out of the coolant system. And most importantly, make sure your fans are working. Let the car get up to full operating temperature. And those fans should kick on to wherever they need to kick on to. If your fans aren't kicking on, make sure you guys go over the wiring, or make sure you get a fan replacement, and make sure those fans are kicking on before you get on the dyno. And another thing, make sure you have a working thermostat. Alright guys, one thing that a lot of people actually overlook, especially people that have coilovers or like to slam their cars or whatever. I mean, I'm not a fan of it, but if your car is really low, believe it or not, you can have problems mounting the dyno or even getting strapped down onto the dyno, depending where the strapping on the chassis, or the type of dyno they're running, that it pulls your chassis even closer to the dyno. So if you're already really close to the floor and they can't strap your car down properly, you're not going to have a dyno session, guys. So make sure that if you're really low, raise up your car for the dyno session. Don't be one of those pain in the butt clients, and just make sure you have that clearance between the chassis and the roller. Alright guys, so that's something to keep in mind. Look into it. I mean, I know a lot of guys that like super low cars, and they still want a lot of power and they want to get the thing on the dyno, but just make sure before you get on the dyno, raise up the car about an inch or two. That way you have enough clearance, and when they pull the car down, they strap the car down into the dyno and the chassis drops down a little bit more. It has that clearance. I know one of my friends had a very close call in that kind of situation. So just make sure you have that clearance, right guys? Make sure the car can drive under its own power. Some setups like mine, where I picked up the compression a lot. I'm running very big cams. I have no VTEC in the car anymore. I have deleted VTEC, so it's running on big cam lobes all the time. So at first it wasn't able to run it under its own power, but I made sure that I contacted my tuner and he sent me a base map, and we got this thing slightly dialed in to the point where the car can idle, stay on its own, and drive under its own power. So now that was the test. We don't want to strap a car down on the dyno if we're not sure it can stay on or drive under its own power. So those are two things you got to look at, guys. Make sure it can do both of those things before you schedule a dyno tune. And if you're not sure, you need to go over those two things. Just contact your tuner, tell them your setup, and ask them what you should be expecting in terms of current drivability. Sorry, the video actually cut off, so contact them about things you should know, like how the car should be acting, current drivability, and the way it should be idling. But other than that, you should be set in that department. Just double check, guys. It's good to know. You don't want to get to the dyno and then you find out, yeah, this car is not tunable. There's something wrong internally with the engine. That's why it's not staying on. Or you actually have a vacuum leak, and that's why the car can't even stay on or turn on. You know, so just make sure you look into those things, okay, guys? Alright, guys, so one more thing that's also often overlooked, and people end up purchasing this on the same day of the dyno tune, like at the dyno shop or something. They always have this available, obviously. Spark plugs. Alright, don't overlook this simple thing. Alright, make sure you have spare spark plugs. Make sure it's the correct heat rating for your kind of setup, depending if it's boost, all motor, depending if you got to go hotter or colder. Look into the gaps of the plugs. For all motor, obviously it won't be as tight. For boost, you'll be running a tighter gap. So just look into that. Contact your tuner. He can also tell you his recommended spark plug that he likes tuning the car with on your kind of specific setup. And just buy them, pre-gap them. If you're not sure how to gap them, they can do it for you most likely. But make sure you have a set of plugs before you arrive to the dyno session. Very important, right, guys? Alright, guys, the last thing I have for you guys in the video is probably a very obvious one that no one really does. Bring some of your own tools, guys. I'm not gonna lie, a lot of shops, they actually expect you to bring some tools. In some shops will even charge you more if they have to bring their tools out to do something on your car if something goes wrong. Like even changing a spark plug, that might pick up the price of the dyno. Sometimes they won't. Maybe your serpentine belt breaks. Bring spare parts, alright, guys? Simple things like spark plugs, serpentine belts, things that are easily replaceable. Bring some extra coolant just in case if your coolant hose blows off. You know, be prepared, guys. Bring some tools to be able to do that. Help your tuner out. Don't leave everything up to him, guys. They really appreciate when you go the extra mile. And if you're not sure if they'll be okay with you working on your car on the dyno, if something goes wrong, just contact them. Hey, should I bring some tools just in case? And they'll be really honest with you. Like, no, don't worry. They'll either be okay with you using their tools, or they'll just be doing the work themselves, or they'll be okay with you bring your tools and working on the car, right, guys? So just bring a couple of extra things, you know, simple things, extra spark plugs like we went over, serpentine belt, extra coolant will go a long way, and even exhaust manifold gasket. Those things can possibly blow out on the dyno. I mean, the exhaust manifold gasket is not 100% necessary. The chances of that going out is very low, especially if it's new already and you had already replaced it. But just think of the things that you feel can go wrong. It depends on how much you're pushing the car and how off your setup is. So spark plug, the reason you want to really get that is because if the car goes in there really rich, if you have a very different setup, sometimes the car is now rich and it's going to foul out the spark plugs, and you know they'll dial it in the best they can on those plugs, but once they start getting ready for the power hits, you swap out to the new plugs and you're good to go. Alright, guys, so that's my video for how to be best prepared for your dyno session. I hope this helps you guys out a lot. You know, for a lot of people, they've never been dyno tuned in their life, and it's their first time going to the dyno. They're not sure what to expect, what to do, how to get the car ready. But this is basically the 101 how to do it. Of course, you can go into way more detail, and there's 1,001 more things you can do to check your car, but that's pretty much the basics. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be safe, peace. Make sure you subscribe and like. Alright, guys? Later.